call the Tuesday, September 10th Wastewater Committee meeting to order. At this time, we will now pledge the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This time, we'll now call the roll.
Here.
Here. At this time, there's several public comment, which is the opportunity you have to speak to the committee on any subject within the jurisdiction of the wastewater committee. It's the council that is not on the agenda. If you'd like to speak to the council.
Good morning, Lori Lord, 907 Vista Lane. Two things. First is a little plug for the coming fire department fundraiser out at the Big Red Barn. And just to remind you all, it's coming, and we hope you can come out and participate with that. I'm back because I didn't do a very good job of asking my question the last time I was here, and that was about something that I read in the minutes. I was just reading the minutes along, and I wanted to find out if anything had happened, and it's the June 18th minutes, and it was about the sewer discussion at the time, about the sewer study. And I guess the key line is that PERC offered to meet with the city to review the current contract and discuss the items of concern. The items of concern were about how much wastewater operator 4 was paid when the Tersh plant was not operating. Again, I don't know exactly how these things work, so I was just looking for someone to tell me why that happens, or confirm that that does happen and the reason behind it is. And then we were paying operator 3 to do weed eating and housekeeping, and a filtering system that's over my pay grade. So my question had been at that time, what kind of came of that discussion? So I wonder if you can fill in the blanks for me, so I just have a better understanding of that, just as a taxpayer and a sewer payer.
Thanks for your comments. We'll get back to you on that, though.
That's what you said to me 6 weeks ago.
Okay, we will. We'll all talk to John.
So is that just, am I being dismissed? Or?
It's public,
no, it's not on the agenda.
It's just on the agenda, it's a public
I
comment.
thought we were supposed to, oh, okay, so I'm just commenting, but quite often you guys answer questions, so.
We do, we're not supposed to. This morning we are in a short time budget, so we will not.
Okay, very good. So would a better way to do it be to write it down?
You can just send it to us, it's fine
Email?
either way. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Lord.
Over the last 2 to 3 weeks, there's been a series of intermittent but fairly strong odors coming out of your tertiary plant. You need to speak to your people, have them tighten things up a little bit, because it is not necessary. We know this from experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? All right. Close public comment. On to our regular agenda. Item number 1, Ione effluent to tertiary.
Yes, I'm going to have John kind of discuss in terms of a little bit more detail in terms of what needs to be done in order to start moving some of these things forward.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning, John.
Probably a couple of months ago, city manager and I had some discussions with respect to trying to move things forward. And back in 2016, Dexter Wilson prepared a water balance report that took a look primarily at long-term water balance needs. And that was somewhat driven by Regional Water Quality's desire to have the ponds lined. And during the writing of that report, we were in the process of lining ponds 1 through 4, and then subsequently we lined pond 5. But that was primarily looking at, so what are we going to do with the effluent if all 7 ponds have to be lined, because that was discussed by Regional Water Quality as a requirement possibly down the road. What's ended up happening is, I'm sure you're aware that we lined ponds 1 through 5. Pond 5 was lined voluntarily. And 6 and 7 we've asked Regional Water Quality to hold off for 5 years to allow us to do different measurements to see whether the lining of 1 through 5 is having a positive impact on the iron manganese issue. But what that 2016 report didn't look at was a number of other things that are needed. Some of those things include potentially better utilization of the tertiary plant, otherwise connecting the secondary and the tertiary plant. We've had a capital project identified with replacing the existing headworks at the secondary plant for, gosh, probably at least 5 years, because in prior city managers, we had asked PERC to provide us with a list of a number of capital projects that were needed, and that's been on the list for quite a while. We did have issues with, my understanding, talking to Todd, that we've had issues with the headworks being overwhelmed during heavy winter rains and having to rent pumps and so on and so forth. So that headworks is antiquated and it's in serious need of upsizing. That really wasn't discussed at all in the 2016 report. The other thing that wasn't discussed in any detail in that report was disinfecting the water. Since that report was written, CDCR has not obtained a permit, but has installed a lot of the infrastructure going down to Woodard Bottom. And in order for us to participate in that, if that is a possibility, we are going to have to install disinfection. I know that the city manager has talked about UV disinfection, which is great, one of the alternatives. But that needs to be investigated, because almost any way we go, other than the exact scenario which we're under right now, which is just spray irrigation, if we start combining it in other ponds, whether it be going up to Preston or whether it be out to Woodard Bottom, we are going to be looking at disinfection. So that needs to be better evaluated, as well as the actual usage of Preston Pond. It was mentioned in the 2016 report as a possibility, but the primary focus, as I said, has been, the focus of that report was to either build Pond 8 to the tune of about $9 million, or pushing the water down to Woodard Bottom. What wasn't really investigated is the possibility of utilizing Preston Pond, particularly given the 2022 departure of ARSA. The nice thing about Preston Pond is it's existing. I guess the downfall is we don't know at this time how much sediment has collected in the bottom of that, what would have to be done. We'd have to double check how much volume is available, and then take into consideration things like how is the pond going to get cleaned in order to maximize the storage capacity, as well as right now the city owns the line and the easements from State Route 104 down to the tertiary plant, but on CDCR's property we do not own that line, and so we would need to negotiate easements with CDCR for operation of that line if we were going to utilize Preston Pond. The other thing is if Preston Pond becomes a primary alternative, is actually getting the water there. And in order to get the water there, there's about 200 feet of head, if I'm not mistaken, between Preston Pond and where our wastewater plant is, which means construction of at least one pump station. And what that would do is push the water from our wastewater treatment plant up to Preston during the winter time and use that as storage. So that was not investigated. That also needs to be investigated. The other thing that's happened since the 2016 report, I mentioned we lined the ponds, but when we lined ponds 1 through 4 in particular, during the cleaning of ponds 1 through 4, we actually found out that they were deeper, and in looking at some of the information that we got on the as-builts, as well as Brett has had Toma Engineering do some topoing and taking into account where full pond levels are, but we've gained I think on the magnitude of 3 or 4 million gallons worth of storage just because of increased pond depths that we didn't know existed before. That needs to be taken into account.
What was the total size of the new pond, the 8? How many million gallons that hold?
Of Pond 8?
Yeah.
I don't.
I'm just curious.
I think it was something on the magnitude of 20 or 22 million gallons. Was it that?
The storage, for the storage Pond 8,
Yeah.
it was like 228
Oh,
feet.
220. Oh,
Right.
acre feet.
They were talking the storage pond.
I know I'm just thinking about millions of how many gallons we're already storing that we don't.
Right.
Okay, that's fine, go ahead.
I mean, it's not gonna have a huge impact, but it is, you know, incrementally starting
Oh, sure,
to
a
take
little bit matters, definitely.
Absolutely. And then finally, one of the other things that was mentioned, I believe in the 2016 report was well at the wastewater treatment plant for irrigating the golf course for supplementing irrigation. But the thing about the 2016 report, it was good. The information in it was valid at the time. It was actually a requirement of regional water qualities permit, but it needs updating. And the other thing that needs to happen is we're marching towards 2022 very rapidly, and not the fear, but the concern that staff has is we've identified all of these things. We need to hone in on exactly what we're doing and actually move forward with some of this stuff. For instance, a new headworks is probably going to cost on the magnitude of $1.5 million. So we start looking at all of these different improvements and the timing of those improvements and making sure that we look at everything from our fees to make sure we're going to have enough revenue generated to pay for that, timing, and putting that all into kind of one big package so we can start moving forward with some of this instead of getting to the point where all of a sudden we're behind the 8 ball and we're in emergency mode and we have to do something.
Like, for a long time, we thought that, you know, treatment and the tertiary, I think now it's becoming a little more, we're in one big thing now, it's kind of a one deal, we're paying for all of it now too. A couple questions real quickly, are you?
Yeah, okay, sure.
So the age and lifespan of the tertiary plant, how long do we, we update the headworks, is it good for more years, like how many more years?
Typically what you take a look at is, particularly if you look at long-range forecasts, let's say a 20-year forecast, you don't necessarily build it right away for 20 years, but you look at ways that you could put in sufficient capacity to handle maybe 10 years, but make it expandable to the point where when capacity levels get reached for one, then you can easily expand it. So I don't have a specific year answer for you because part of it depends on growth, obviously.
No, I'm just saying, like, if we add the headworks and then the rest of the plant fails, we've done nothing. So, I mean, but the rest of the plant's in pretty good shape, I guess, or, I mean, it's old, but I mean, how, if it's...
Yeah, I mean, it's operating efficiently, and Brett could speak to it better than I can, but, you know, the pond system has worked for a number of years. It continues to work, particularly if we spray irrigate. And the facilities that were put in, even with some of the phases, the initial phases. And one thing I will mention, kind of skipping back to disinfection, when I think it was GHD was the engineer that did the initial update of the report of waste discharge, and they had provided a design for the initial upgrade of the wastewater plant. That included an entire chlorination facility, and then it was going to go to spray irrigation. That was put out to bid, and it came in significantly over budget. I want to say that they had estimated $3.5 million, and it came in just under $5 million. And so we actually took a step back, kind of re-looked at things, got permission from regional water quality to not have to disinfect for the spray irrigation that we were using. We took out the chlorination facilities out of the design, but one thing that was done is we actually designed the piping between ponds 4, where it comes down and gets distributed to 5, 6, and 7. We actually sized that pipe and set it up that if we ever did, and this is not UV, but if we ever did go to sodium hypochlorite or some other kind of disinfection, that we'd be able to inject it just where pond 4 water exits, and by the time it got down, there was about 1,000 feet of piping, that pipe could actually be a disinfection channel, basically. It would act as a sufficient kill time for the disinfection before it got into our pond. So there were certain things done trying to take into account long-range planning for the plant, but anyway.
Okay, cool. And then, go ahead.
I had asked before for your triage list of, you know, what had to come first, what you want, what is the most important thing to do first from your perspective. And am I seeing is this the list of 1, 2?
Actually, the city manager kind of put this list together. I would say, and Brent, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the headworks is probably the number one thing that we need to concentrate on right now.
That's what I figured.
Simply because we've already experienced some significant issues with that. And it's been, like Brett said, it's been a number of years that's been on the list, and we're now seeing, you know, if we continue down the course that we're doing, we're gonna end up with some real problems.
So do we have any cost estimates for what that's gonna cost us?
We've done some kind of back of the napkin estimates. Actually, Todd did some, Brett did some, and we did some, and all of it honed in at about $1.5 million. Now, one thing I will mention with the new headworks, one of the things that is lacking right now is what I'm gonna call screening. Usually at a wastewater treatment plant at the headworks, usually there is some kind of screening where we take out anything from rags to solids to what have you.
We talked about that a couple of meetings ago.
So when you look at the expense that we've gone to, and since I've been city engineer starting in 2010, we've gone through it twice. We've spent at least $750,000 taking sludge out of the ponds. A lot of that is because we haven't been able to screen the influent coming in. So you start looking at payback for that investment, even though $1.5 million sounds like a lot of money. If you could avoid having to desludge those ponds instead of every 3 or 4 years, make it every 10 or 20 years, all of a sudden that starts.
So the screening would be in conjunction with the headworks then?
Yes,
that'd be part of the package, I guess.
Screening and grit removal.
Would be part of the
Right,
package of the headworks.
that's part of the new headworks.
Good. Questions there?
What kind of a time frame would you like to see this happen in?
Yesterday.
Okay, let's go back to the reality.
The reality is, if that were something that the wastewater committee and the council said, you know, go ahead, the reality of it is, even if we were to either retain a wastewater engineer or we were to do it, doesn't matter which way you go, you're probably looking at a minimum of a year from now by the time you would be able to get to construction. And a lot of that, honestly, is going to depend on financing.
Okay. Questions? Okay. Do we have any thoughts if ARSA will ban the pond? The pond is Preston's owned by CDCR.
That's my understanding.
And I guess when Preston's, if ARSA's out, then they're out, and I guess the pond goes, I mean, it's owned by the state, but they kind of, I'm not sure how that's even contractually used, I mean.
They have agreement, ARSA has an agreement with CDCR. And
Yeah.
CDCR has approached us about, when ARSA leaves,
Okay, that's what I'm.
us to use that for storage.
Okay, that's my question, thank you.
Okay.
Public comment?
Yes.
Come on down.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a beautiful day. I've even got on a jacket.
Yeah,
Right.
no, it's feeling like it's great.
Hang on, guys. Friday, they said it's gonna be 97
Yeah,
again.
I know.
My name is Sally Barron, and I have I don't live in Ione, but I have good friends that lived here and been hanging around here for about 50 years. And I have several questions, listening to your discussion. First thing is, I understand that accepting this sewage, et cetera, from the prison is not yet permitted. And why is the city of Ione accepting the sewage anyway? I mean, this is when sewage is piped over to the city sewer plant, where does it go? Does it go through the tertiary treatment plant and then into the ponds? And that works, except that you mentioned that you do not have a disinfectant system on the sewer plant at the current time. And I guess in the past it hasn't really been an issue. However, you must be aware that the prison who's going to send you the sewage is currently in violation of state, local, and federal wastewater requirements. They have signed up for a federal program, which puts them under federal regulations, that they can't possibly meet. That was done on the 7th of February of this year. The State Water Resources Board, they have two effectively cease and desist orders for dumping raw sewage into their stormwater. The stormwater is being happily dumped into the sewage that they have without going through their tertiary plant. And then we have all the leakage under the prison and the buildings going into the storm drain system, which is hooked up to the sewer system, which they are going to ship to you. You have untreated sewage coming in and you have no disinfectant set up for it. And this is going to contaminate your entire system. So I don't understand why the city of Ione would be even remotely interested in getting this sewage. And then because you can't disinfect it, it's not properly treated, you don't know the composition of what you're getting, because you're getting industrial sewage from the manufacturing, especially the meat processing that's going on at the prison. You're getting water coming out of the coffee roasting, which carries a whole nother set of problems as far as chemicals coming down. And this is all coming in, so even if you get it through your own, and you said it was a bit of a problem because there's no disinfectant in your headwater setup, tertiary treatment plant, you're going to dump it into Woodward Bottom, which is not permitted, which the tribe owns. So you're going to end up, quite possibly, with a huge problem with dirty sewage being dumped there. And the thing is that I don't see, looking at your timeline for upgrading your tertiary plant and your lack of storage, even using the Preston storage area. And then you didn't mention on any of this, how many new housing is projected in Ione over, say, the next 10 years? We're talking a 10 or 20-year upgrade on the existing sewer plant. Okay, how much growth is projected here, and how is the existing sewage system going to handle the prison, which will probably maintain its same inmate level since they don't have any place to put people, and the new housing that is coming in, and the fact that CDCR does not want to do the proper inspections that they should do on their leaking sewer system. And so that's probably going to continue until somebody sues them. And that's the next step down the road. They will be sued over this. The federal government will sue them. The state will try to correct themselves, and there will be suits filed from people who have been damaged by their sloppy sewage thing. So I am hoping, you guys are trying really hard, I understand this, but I hope you have really good liability insurance, because for yourselves on the board and for the city itself, because it's coming, and it's coming fast. So anyway, are there any questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Weinger. I have a question, just a clarification. You mentioned that there were as-bills for the pond lining project. As late as last Tuesday, Commissioner Rhodes was lamenting the lack of as-bills. So I just wanted clarification. Do we now have the as-bills? Are they in city possession, and are they available now for public inspection?
Yes, we've had the as-built. I sent Councilor Rhodes a PDF copy. He was having difficulties opening them. Stacy, were you able to open them?
Halfway. I'll just look at the hard copy.
Yeah, he's got a hard copy in his mailbox, but yes, we've had the PDF files.
Oh, okay. As I said, as late as Tuesday, he said
Right,
we
yeah,
didn't
you're
have
right.
them, so we've gotten them
Yeah,
since.
we've had them before.
Oh,
Just,
okay.
it's one of those that got missed in terms of the request. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. I
Yeah,
just,
but
having heard it, it's
We've
impressive.
had the PDFs.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Did you want a copy?
No, not right now.
Okay.
Though I strongly disagreed with it at the time, I can understand your mindset of wanting to piggyback on corrections to protect you from enforcement from regional water. I get that. Problem is, there seems to be an absolute failure on everybody in City Hall to recognize that the ground has changed a little bit. Woodard Bottom is no longer owned by the party that made the agreement with corrections. And since there is no contract, and I can tell you this definitely because I made a public records request from corrections, there is no contract defining what is to be done with the Woodard Bottom by the state of California, only a construction contract. So legally, that is not a state project. And again, there is no legal obligation for the new owner to even talk to you, much less take your toxic waste. Now, I'm hoping that you've been reading the papers, or at least taking the time to read the reports that are coming out of there. It is not good. For you to hook up with corrections is almost a guarantee of failure on every front. To be honest, you have one option that will work, that you can afford, and that's to start treating your own wastewater to tertiary. Dump it in the creek in the winter, give it to the golf course in the summer. It's always been like that, and for reasons unknown, you have decided to go in this direction. Now, very shortly after Mr. Hankin got here, myself and 3 other gentlemen went and gave him many, many options for going for the wastewater. All of these were ignored, and now here we are, 4 years later, and there is absolutely no function, no facet of the wastewater diamond that isn't in abject and complete failure. So it's time to start looking at things a little differently, people, okay? Time to start listening to people besides Bob Sleppy, who has no background in wastewater at all, but he made the proclamation that, oh, that'll take 650 acre-feet of water when he first showed up. Okay, step a little higher, read more of your own information, which 5 years ago told you the cheapest way for you to go was treat your own wastewater and dump it in the tertiary plant. Do you have any questions? Good luck.
All right, close public comment. Any other discussion, recommendations? Perhaps the Headworks and Screening Project?
I think we definitely need to move forward with that.
Okay, I'm there. So you have a recommendation from the committee to move forward with the Headworks and Screening Project?
And any conversations about, in terms of the effluent to the tertiary, in terms of starting to look at that?
Yeah, definitely need to do that too. I mean, that's,
I understand the top priority,
Yeah.
but like I said, when we start looking at a 2022 timeframe, I kind of want to keep moving things in terms of, again, looking at getting getting our effluent to the tertiary in terms of the piping, in terms of pumps, in terms of all of that going as well.
And that's fine. As far as your time and energy, I think it needs to go into the headworks and the screening. And then definitely the piping over to tertiary, and then potentially the UV.
Yeah.
You know, we need to understand what, we need to understand how much it's gonna cost.
Right.
B, we need to understand where we're gonna get the funds for it, and how we're gonna get them,
Right.
and how long it's gonna take us to get them. And what that means as far as, you know, the taxpayers.
Right, and that's why I'm kind of looking at this as a scope of work in terms of being able to answer all those questions.
So if you're looking for more work, then great, then let's go to at least all 4 of those.
And again, I mean.
Because they all kind of tie together,
And that's where I was going, they all kind of tie together, so
Right.
like I said, I don't want to.
piecemeal it.
Piecemeal, I mean, you know, some things may be more developed in others in terms of the recommendation and then follow through, but like I said, I see things tied together, so I don't want to, you know, I want to keep things kind of moving forward. Okay?
Agreed.
One of the comments that I would have on that is, I think it's important that we look at those priorities that you just said, but the other important thing is to look at the big picture, because it's long-term issues, it's the storage issues, it's the pumping, you know, so we've got a critical need in the headworks, but closely followed to that is a lot of this other stuff. So one of the discussions that we've had with John is actually almost coming up with just a capital improvement program just for the wastewater issues, because I think it's important for the council and this committee to know not only what's going to be needed, but when it's going to be needed and how much it's going to cost. So there could be that fiscal component to
Absolutely.
the planning.
If you do it any other way, we're wasting our time, because you can't, it's like the chicken and the egg. You can't do one without the other, so
They'll be
you might as well
upsize the
tie them
headworks
all
even
together.
farther or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you get the headworks done and something else fails, you've wasted your time.
Right.
And if we're going to, which we probably will have to do some kind of a funding plan for this, either it be a grant or whatever, we want to put it all into one program.
Right. Very good. Okay. So is that clear enough direction then? Move forward with that? Okay. On to item number 2, headworks upsizing. We just talked about that, I guess.
Yeah.
A lot of this was all
Oh,
combined in
yeah,
terms of the
okay.
discussion.
Very good. The effluent line easement, we talked about that. Water balance estimates, number 6.
That was kind of as a part of that
Okay.
discussion too. The only thing, and again, I know John mentioned the well at the wastewater plant for irrigation. You might want to go into that maybe in a little bit more detail, because that's one of those that can be a totally separate project.
Yeah, and I will be the first to admit, showing up today, I didn't come too prepared for that.
I know we have tested that well in the past. There's some estimates somewhere how much it produces. I mean, it might actually be able, because I know right now, I think they take like 1 million gallons a year to flush up the ponds in the fall.
Right.
I mean, this actually might be an option for that if we reverse flow. We're able to bring water from the treatment plant over to the tertiary plant. They might be able to use that water if it was a cheaper source, if it was, also, if it was, but it would qualify for what they're using it for. It may not, because it may not be treated properly, I don't know, but that might, some things.
This was one of those items that was just briefly mentioned in the 2016-2020 capacity plan. So like I said, I didn't want to leave that off the table, because again, as we start talking about water balances, and again, whether there's enough for crop irrigation or whatever, that's another potential source that, again, as we initially talked about, is pulling water out of there. Hopefully that would help with the iron and manganese issue in terms of flushing that groundwater.
Okay, very good. So any other discussion or comments from the staff? Okay, committee? I'll take any further public comment on the rest of the agenda there.
It's not really on the subject, but I keep hearing this subject of piping from the wastewater to the tertiary. Many years ago, there was a project called the South Valley Pump Station. So I'm a little curious why nobody in this room seems to understand that there is now an empty, unused pipe that runs from your South Valley Pump Station down Dave Brubeck across the creek and to your tertiary plant. Your piping only has to go from your wastewater treatment to your South Valley Pump Station, which I really kind of hope already exists. So all you have to do is put a pump in your South Valley Pump Station, maybe an addendum to the EIR, because you're changing the directional flow if you have to do that, but 90% of that is already there.
I have a question. So is that the one that was used for irrigation, the farmland years ago?
No, it was built, it was never used. Okay, that's the pipe that's on the downstream side of that bridge that goes underneath the pipe that you just approved for corrections. It's been empty and unused. And again, because people don't read their own information, there are no fewer than 4 unused pipes in that bridge at this moment. So since every inch of those pipes is paid by taxpayers, again, I would greatly appreciate it if we would put down the decaf and start reading our own reports. Okay, and be aware of the assets and facilities that you already have. Any questions?
Issue. Any public comment? Seeing none, we will close public comment and we will adjourn. Thank you very much.